This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Hey everybody, Tim Capel here, and welcome to, I can hardly believe now already, our third episode of Traders of the Lost Arks. This is a comic-centered podcast here on Place to Be Nation Pop. And we've got a great panel, as always. Joining me to go through our next topic is, he shares my love of 80s and early 90s comics. This is Shawn Kidd, and we're going to be talking about a book from the 80s on this episode. So, Shawn, I know you're looking forward to this one as much as I am.
Yes, good evening, Tim. I am super excited for tonight's episode. I am not going to spoil it here on the upfronts, as we'll jump into it. Selected by not our traditional comics reader host tonight, so I'm really excited to talk about this one. But we definitely have a treat in store for our listeners this evening, so looking forward to it.
That's right. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, probably on the verge of quitting, certainly after we go through this, is Scott Shifflett. Scott, how are you?
You guys are so lucky that I enjoy doing this with you, because I did this read a couple of days ago, and the app that you told me to download to read this on has a little counter in the bottom left-hand corner when you click the info on how long it takes you to read the comic. I was taking like 15, 20 minutes per comic.
Oh, yeah, easily.
Just because it not only it was a little verbose, but that's 80s comics, but also it was slowly making me lose my will to live. And I'm excited to talk about it with you guys. And it's usually for you guys that listen to these on our pop feed and even on the wrestling feed, me and Shawn usually have different opinions, and where I'm usually like, I like it, and Shawn's like, it's butt, and he calls me a mark for everything. This time, it's trash. Like, there's no other way around it. I'm sorry, Andy.
All right, so excited to be here, but also losing the will to live is Scott Shifflett. But the man of the hour, the man who picked this episode's topic, believe it or not, the, I guess, comics-oriented Andy Atherton. So, Andy, why don't you tell us what you picked for us to read and why you picked it?
Well, I just wanted to prove to everybody that not only am I a real American hero, there is more to me than meets the eye. Okay? And that is why I picked G.I. Joe versus the Transformers.
Oddly enough, not a versus, but an and the.
That threw me off a couple times. It's not versus and the Transformers.
It's one of those things, like, I had in my memory, I guess I had thought it was, because based on the cover for the first episode issue, you would think that it's G.I. Joe versus the Transformers, but it's G.I. Joe and the Transformers.
Yeah.
Yes, as has been well established, even though we are only in our third episode, that I have not really read comics, but I have, and I actually own. I can if you hear, I'm holding physical comics because I own the series and some accompanying other G.I. Joe and Transformers, just because my geekdom really in the 80s, outside of video games growing up, was cartoons, more specifically the weekday afternoon cartoons. Coming home from school, and this was like all through, even in the high school, and it continued into college, and if it was still on, I would probably watch it today. But coming home and watching Thundercats and Voltron and Mask, and my two favorites, 4 and 4:30 on WPIX, Channel 11 in New York, was, I believe at 4 o'clock it was G.I. Joe, and at 4:30 was Transformers. So that was appointment viewing for me every weekday. I had several G.I. Joe figures. I didn't have that many Transformers, but it was just something that, and me and all my friends in the neighborhood, we all watched them. It was something I just grew up loving. Hate that they can't get it right in a movie really today, but I just picked something that I was familiar with, and you guys threw me a bone. I know of the characters and stuff, like we'll talk about in like the superhero and other ones. I don't know the story specifically, but I know of the characters. I don't go too deep into that, but this is something where I recognize the characters. I had memories flashing back. I was getting angry about some characters being there, some characters not being there. Also confused because my memory, is fading at times, and trying to figure out where in the timeline we were. And I'm like, did this happen? This really happened? It was a fun read though for me, because I really, I felt like I was there. Like I could relate, and I had some frame of reference, not like in our first two where I was kind of just like there for the ride and kind of figuring out as I go. There was a lot of comics logic and things happening in these 4 books.
Comics logic, I like it.
But there was a lot of comics type things, stuff you wouldn't see in the cartoon that I was used to. It was like a different medium, a different forum, different ways of telling stories, different things happening, because some things that you would never see. I mean, for crying out loud, nobody ever died in the cartoon.
No.
Nobody.
Or got shot. Like
they always, like, if a jet went down, they always parachuted in like the last minute. Or
they fired so many damn bullets, but nobody ever, not one fatal shot was ever fired in the.
I want to say, and correct me if I'm wrong. I wasn't, and I'm going to have a lot of questions for you, Andy. I'm just going to state that out at the outset, because for once, this is going to be more of an education for me, more of a learning experience, because I have very little exposure to these characters and this world. I gather they seem to share the same world, if not in the cartoon, than in the comics. So what I remember from watching like episodes of G.I. Joe here and there, which I never really watched it as it was on. It was just sort of, I guess, whenever I could catch it. It was just like crisscrossing laser beams going crazy all across the screen. The blue ones were the Joes, the red ones were for Cobra. Nothing ever connected with anything, and it was just like complete chaos. And I know it's a lot of characters. I guess I kind of know the big names. Transformers seemed a little bit more. To my mind, I don't want to say sophisticated, but it seemed a little bit less all over the place compared to G.I. Joe, where, I don't know, it seemed to have more concrete plots. It seemed to have probably, to my mind at least, again, correct me if I'm wrong, fewer characters, so it was easier to focus in on something or someone. I want to say maybe it was a little bit more violent, although I might just be thinking of the movie, which I know somewhat well. Does that stand up in your mind?
It was maybe a little more violent, more explosions and things. But the thing about Transformers is the rosters are probably similar sizes. I think G.I. Joe is probably a tad bigger, but the thing about Transformers was you had the 2 main sides. You had the Autobots and Decepticons, but then you had all these subgroups that were introduced over time, and ultimately they were all small though. They were all like 5 to 6 per, and they all formed a giant ass robot.
Right?
And that kind of made
a giant ass robot in the series.
Yeah, it made it kind of easier to I guess figure out, because there were certain characters using certain stories where it was like in G.I. Joe you had people that were they were there because they can do this one thing really well.
I'll put it this way, I can't even really tell you who the leadership of G.I. Joe is or was. Okay, so I remember it being this guy called Duke, okay? And
that's my leader.
All right, so who is this?
Was that Channing Tatum?
All right, so
in the movie, miscast, yes.
All right, so General Hawk.
I thought so.
In the comics, Hawk is the leader. Duke was created for the cartoons. Okay. And as you see, but I guess as you can see, as the story we talk about tonight, there's a reason why they created Duke for the cartoons based on Hawk being such
I
a
hated Hawk as a kid. I hate him even more now.
Yeah.
Is Hawk in the cartoon at all?
Yes. He comes in later. He comes in later.
He does come in later, but in the early ones, no. And it threw me off as a kid because when Duke was the leader, I'm like, where the fuck is Hawk?
Okay. All right. So,
and then
all right,
it threw me off, like, because when Hawk comes in, I'm like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah, it's like why is Hawk even here? Because Duke was our leader. That's it's literally
Duke
true.
was like the Danny Ocean, and Flint was like Rusty.
Yes, correct. Yes.
All right. Was Duke in the comics at all?
That's the Shawn question.
I would have to do some research. No,
I say the comics. Let's just say the original Marvel comics.
In the original, if he was, it would be much, much later.
Okay, so probably not.
Yeah,
we'll say. All right, and isn't there a guy called like General Flag or something?
Yes.
Or a commander or something. I don't know.
He's like.
See, this is how ignorant I am.
He's like. Yes, he's like Hawks. Like he's like the Pentagon guy.
He's like
he's
the government like liaison to GI Joe.
Yeah, he's like the government guy. He's not really a huge factor.
He's not a combatant.
He's not a. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
He's more like a name that you hear more than the character you see.
Gotcha,
like we have to report back to Flag, or this is Flag's orders or something like that. From what I can remember from the cartoon.
Hey Tim, he's like Nick Fury. He's like those people up on the screen Nick Fury had to talk to on the computer when they were all on the computer screen in the Marvel movies.
I got you. So I guess that's what confused me about G.I. Joe. You've got like a lot of, I mean, it's the military, right? So you've got a lot of branches of the organization. You've got a hierarchy and a lot of different leaders, and not necessarily everyone's going to be in every episode. And I just think of Transformers as being, okay, it's Optimus Prime and the Autobots, and it's Megatron and the Decepticons, and that's kind of all I really need to know. And that's not really a complaint. I mean, for fuck's sake, I'm somebody who reads and loves X-Men comics from, the 60s through the early 2000s, really, which is about as convoluted as anything gets. But I just, that's where I, as a newcomer, have a harder time with these two properties. Now, one more question. Did you have a favorite, Andy, between the two of G.I. Joe Transformers? Was there one that, is it like you can't choose, or was there one that was significantly better than the other at a certain time, or are they held in equal standing for you?
They're pretty close, but if they were on TV against each other, I would probably go G.I. Joe.
You would watch G.I. Joe over Transformers if you had to?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would second that.
Okay. Schiff, you've been quiet. I don't mean to leave you out. Do you have any familiarity with either of these, other than maybe the shitty movies that have been made in recent years?
Just the shitty movies. That's the only, when I said Duke was Channing Tatum, that's the only familiarity that I have with it. And then killed him off in the second movie, spoilers. And then
that made me even more angry and hated that film from that moment.
Fuck
like they as somebody, you guys know, like I love what I love, and I will go to bat for things that I like. Look, Avatar, I kind of really like, and I actually really liked Snake Eyes, that movie, but. Yeah, I go into these movies with like hopes up, and they always get dashed. Like, first Transformers wasn't terrible. I don't hate that movie, but after that it was all downhill. But the moment they killed Duke off, I'm like, y'all lost me. You just fucked over your biggest supporter here, and I'm out.
Hey, Tim, real quick. Duke first appears in G.I. Joe number 22 as a security person at General Flag's funeral.
Wow.
So, just to coincide with those two characters for you.
Interesting. So, all right. So we should establish that the cartoon universe for both of these properties is rather different than the comics universe for these properties. These are both huge multimedia 1980s franchises. I mean, by this point, and by the way, these issues, it's issues 1 through 4. This is a limited series, by the way, as opposed to a mini series. That was a Marvel DC distinction that I don't think we've ever talked about. Marvel would brand everything that was not an ongoing title as a limited series. DC would use the term mini series. So I don't know why that distinction exists, but it's always stood out in my mind because I'm weird like that. But I noticed these were cover dated January 1987 through April 1987. For some reason, I don't know if this limited series, was cover dated way far in advance of its actual publication dates, because when you look at the stuff that was coming out alongside this, it like pulls everything back to that first issue being on sale like late September. So this is really like a September through December 86.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I was looking at it, because when I was looking
really and I think it's accurate. I think that and I'm just going by Mike's World of AmazingComics.com, which is an amazing website, to get that information, but I think it's accurate based on some of the house ads and the Marvel bullpen bulletins that lists all the stuff that's coming out alongside this issue that you're reading. I think that Mike's World information is accurate. So this is really a 1986 limited series, and boy, when we get to what else was coming out at this time, it's holy shit. But anyway, big multimedia franchises, Transformers, they had the movie, Transformers the movie, kind of a big flop, but sort of popular, it seems like, within its fandom. I've actually
it became a cult classic, basically.
Yeah, I was
cult
going to say,
classic.
what are you calling a flop? I mean,
it didn't make money.
I mean, it made money in our hearts, Tim.
It probably, it probably did make money on the back end over the years, but at the time it was not seen as a moneymaker. Now, interestingly, there were several kind of ongoing comics series and projects, all published by Marvel at this point. Both G.I. Joe and Transformers had their own ongoing monthly series. At this point, G.I. Joe would have been farther along than Transformers. It was in I don't know, coming up on issue 50 or in the 50s, whereas Transformers was in the 20s, right? And this was not, I should stress, part of the Star imprint, which was a line of comics that Marvel published that were mostly licensed properties intended for children. These were kids' comics. So it was stuff like Thundercats. Alf was in there. Heathcliff, Muppet Babies. I think they did Masters of the Universe. Spider-Ham. Not that it was licensed, but it was still a Star comic. But so you would think that Transformers and G.I. Joe would be part of that imprint, but for whatever reason they were not. Transformers was written at the time, from its inception anyway, by a guy named Bob Budiansky, who, they tell the story on, if you've seen the episode of the Netflix series, The Toys That Made Us, they did a Transformers episode. I don't remember which series it was, but they do a nice little retelling of Jim Shooter, the then editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics, just sort of needing someone to write this licensed comic that, they just landed this pretty big deal through Hasbro. They're already doing G.I. Joe. Now they're like, okay, we're going to make some money off of Transformers. Who do we get to do this? And, nobody really wants to write a licensed book. It's sort of like, I don't know. It's seen as beneath a lot of writers, I think, and
I guess they don't like money.
I guess not. But Bob Budiansky was the man for the job, and he became associated with Transformers in kind of the same way that Larry Hama was the longtime writer of G.I. Joe, again for Marvel as well. And Larry Hama also did all the the little file cards on the back of the action figures that had all the biographical information and everything. He wrote all of those also. So
Which makes sense.
You got to figure those guys have made some money, like you said, Schiff, over the years. Just
and they
hopefully,
did. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
I just hope they had some pretty lucrative royalty incentives built into whatever work for hire contracts they had, because I'd like to think those guys are doing well today. What were you going to say, Andy?
Well, it's basically the Transformers universe in the Order of Battle G.I. Joes. That's what that is. Those are the cards that would come with the figures, basically. We told you, like, what their real name is for G.I. Joe, where they're from, their skill set, and basically a mini biography. And what's funny is the G.I. Joe and the Transformers comics have a cover price of 75 cents each.
Yep.
The Order of Battles and Transformers Universe had a cover price of $1.25 each.
Oh, they're getting away with charging a little bit more. So those were, I guess, considered more of a premium special series. So those were two of the spin-offs from the ongoing Transformers and G.I. Joe books for Marvel. So you got to figure they're reasonably successful if they're already getting spin-offs here. So they get, like you said, G.I. Joe, Order of Battle, Transformers Universe. Those were sort of, like you said, Andy, reference guides, character profiles. It was done very much, I noticed, from what I looked at, in the vein of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, which, Marvel did kind of the same thing for their own characters, which went many, many, many volumes deep. I also have down something called G.I. Joe Digest, which I think was a reprint title of earlier issues, and something called G.I. Joe Special Missions, which I couldn't tell you what that was, but it's another ongoing G.I. Joe series. So those franchises doing well for Marvel.
They would do like individual missions of individual Joes, so it was almost like a one-off series that was separate.
Okay.
Like
created from like the ongoing,
like an Avengers Spotlight, or
almost like
perhaps Avengers West Coast.
Yeah, to kind of focus on to focus on one-off missions that didn't affect the ongoing series. Does that make sense?
Yep, I got you.
Yep.
And the aforementioned Transformers the movie got adapted as a 4-issue, again, limited series by Marvel at the time that G.I. Joe and the Transformers was also on sale. So, wow. And that's going to have, we think, an impact on how events play out in this series, which we're going to get into, because it can be a little bit confusing. But before I delve into that, anything else on just memories of Transformers comics or G.I. Joe comics from the time you guys were reading them at all, before I get into the context of the time period here?
Let's do it.
All right. So, oh boy, 1986 in comics. I mean, that's a huge year in general. We've kind of talked about and alluded to. It's, I think, going to be similar to 1992 in our first episode where we talked about Capel and everything that was being published in and around that time period. But, taking it back to I'm going by September 1986 as our starting point, even though this first issue was cover dated as far ahead as January. But you had Marvel celebrating their 25th anniversary with each of their November cover dated issues featuring a prominent character in like a close-up mugshot. So, if it's a team book, they would take a prominent team member and slap their mug on the cover, and it had like it had a border running along the left-hand side and bottom of the cover. That was the same for each title. So it basically was just a themed cover month for them, just celebrating their 25th anniversary. So you'd have things like Captain America looking very optimistic and patriotic. You'd have Wolverine looking rugged and rough. You'd have variations on Spider-Man because he had, 3 different ongoing series at the time. You had Cyclops looking very dour. I mean, just stuff like this. But those are very memorable.
Yeah, I very distinctly remember the Venom cover, the Venom costume. I remember that one.
Oh yeah, the black costume. I think he was upside down on that one or something.
Yeah, something like that, but it's very distinguishable. I remember.
It's the type of thing that when you run across one of those issues, you kind of look at it and you go, "What the hell?" And then you go, "Oh yeah, this was that 25th anniversary cover gimmick." They certainly stand out. Okay, so Avengers Under Siege, the storyline where the Masters of Evil kind of break into Avengers Mansion and whip the entire team's ass, including Jarvis the Butler. That is not starting, but kind of concluding. It's through its middle and concluding chapters in Avengers 273 through 276. That's a classic Avengers story. Roger Stern and John Buscema, creative team on that. One of the great Avengers stories before the Avengers were, the huge franchise they are now. I also have down John Walker, a.k.a. U.S. Agent, making his first appearance. At the time, he was known as Super Patriot. That was in Captain America number 323. So DC, meanwhile, has just come out of Crisis on Infinite Earths, big 12-issue, year-long reboot of their entire universe. They're already gearing up for their next line-wide crossover because Legends number 1 is published, which I've never actually read. I don't know if that's any good, but I sort of want to read it, just knowing a little bit about what it involves. But sort of parallel to that, DC is like slowly reintroducing all of their flagship characters in their post-crisis forms. So, and that makes for kind of a wonky transition because it's not everything all at once. It's kind of, okay, here's Batman, which happens in Batman 401. Here's Superman, which happened throughout the Man of Steel miniseries, not limited series. That continues into the ongoing Action Comics number 584 and Superman number 1. You also had the legacy title Adventures of Superman number 424. This is all the John Byrne Superman stuff. Okay. You've got, oh my goodness, the Mutant Massacre, which we've talked about, at least Shawn and I, ad nauseum, I'm sure, to you, Shawn, right?
Yes.
You're probably so sick of hearing about this. I'm going to make y'all read it.
I'm down for reading it, but
I think you're gonna. I really do think you're gonna like it because it's got an easy hook. It's very accessible.
I'll be on our special 6-hour episode.
Yeah. We'll have to really plan for stuff like that. That's that many issues. But the Mutant Massacre, you've got Uncanny X-Men 211 through 213, New Mutants 45, a Shawn Kidd favorite Power Pack number 27, where a group of children fight Sabretooth. X Factor issues 10 and 11. Thor numbers 273 to 274. Yes, Thor got involved in this X-Men crossover. It's kind of awesome. And Daredevil number 238. There's also, so I would not call G.I. Joe an actual war comic because it's more of an action adventure series, right? I mean, yeah, it has the trappings of, these two factions are at war, but it's not. Look, Saving Private Ryan, it's not, okay?
No,
But
it was always about trying to, squash one of Cobra's plans that
schemes, yeah.
Yeah, like what are we going to
guys.
try this week? We're gonna try to take over the world through the insurance business. This week we're gonna get mind control people's GI Joe's families because they can't ever possibly fire on it. And that episode fucked me up as a kid, by the way. They somehow got the real names of GI Joes and got them to all mind control. It was pretty mind bending. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, in contrast, there was an actual war comic that starts up around this time frame. It's called The Nam, by an actual Vietnam veteran writer by the name of Doug Murray, with art from Michael Golden, which is a very big get for a series like this. And it was it was semi-autobiographical, but it was more, I guess you could consider it maybe historical fiction and comic book form. It was meant to be an 8-year sort of experimental comic. I don't know that it lasted the full 8 years. It started, let's see, if it started in 86, yeah, I don't think it lasted as long as 94, but I could be wrong about that. I want to say like the Punisher even makes some appearances later in that run, like when he was in the war before he was the Punisher. It's interesting.
It's such a weird time because like Vietnam is such a divisive war. Like that's weird. Like basically 12 years after it ended, like we have a comic out on that. That'd be like
we're gonna do a comic about this very, kind of rough subject matter, and still, like you said, very divisive, especially at that time.
Well, there were a lot of movies too. It was Vietnam was like the hot, subject at times because you had so many movies in the 80s that were coming out that was based on the Vietnam War, Platoon, Full Metal Jacket and such. So
yeah, well, and we also have a finally, this is rounding out sort of the context here. Marvel, again, this is part of their 25th anniversary celebration, and they decided, and there were various different discussions about how are we going to really do this. They even looked into doing a reboot along the lines of something like a Crisis on Infinite Earths, the way DC had done, and just start from scratch. And they said, no, we always describe, Marvel, what differentiates us from DC, from our competition is, the Marvel comics, the Marvel characters, this is the world outside your window. We're supposed to be more grounded and realistic, and all of our stories take place in real cities. So why don't we really double down on that premise and use that as a launching pad? And so what they did was, there was all this fanfare, all this hype around this new imprint that was separate, set aside from the Marvel Universe. It was its own thing. You can kind of think of it the same way as the Ultimate Universe was done, in the early 2000s. And it was called the New Universe. And it was going to have a lot of money behind it. It was going to have like pretty high profile creators. I mean, they were going to go all out on this thing. And then, the financial hammer dropped. Turned out, I guess, 1986 wasn't as great a year as maybe the parent company would have hoped. And not to say Marvel wasn't still making money hand over fist, but suffice to say, budgets were cut. And they were left with like no money whatsoever to do this imprint that they had now solicited 8 new ongoing titles.
Wow.
With a real commitment that, this is going to be great. This is going to be mind blowing. There's going to be comics like you've never seen them. And it's like, oh shit, now we've got to pick up the scraps here and hope guys are going to work for free until we can actually pay them. And we're not going to get the best creators. We're not going to get the best talent. We're going to get who we have available, basically. And they ended up canceling a lot of ongoing books at the time. Things like, I want to say, Power Man and Iron Fist and New Defenders, kind of lower tier, lower selling ongoing Marvel books. They ended up canceling because they needed to free up the resources to do this thing that they had promised, and now no one wanted to do. And so the idea of the new universe was there was a cosmic event. It was called the White event, I think, where like the Earth gets bathed in this white light, and some people come out of it with superpowers, essentially. And beyond that, that's the only supernatural phenomenon that takes place in this universe. It just, everything kind of goes from there. The people who have their powers are going to be your established characters that we follow, and the conflicts that take place throughout their histories from that point on. And it was set, like, again, basically in our world. So I want to say, like, Pittsburgh was a big setting because that's where Jim Shooter was actually from.
The enema of America.
Yeah. Well, they actually later on down the line, they end up basically nuking Pittsburgh, and it becomes a giant sinking crater. So, in a roundabout way, it does become America's enema, where you put the enema in America.
Oh, jeez.
But this is titles. They have names like Starbrand and Justice and DP7. Don't ask me what that stands for. It's Cyforce.
You know,
and
everyone knows.
Night Mask and Spitfire and the Troubleshooters. All these very bizarre names.
This sounds like a shitty CW show. Or hell, I'm going to say a shitty USA show in the early 2000s that they would make and then just burn off on Fridays.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. It reminded me, some of these titles, I mean, there were even some bad 90s superhero shows, like on UPN. I'm thinking of stuff like Nightman. I mean, we're based on actual properties, but very, like, lower tier sort of properties. There was a show called Nightman. There was a show called Mantis on Fox, which that was an original kind of just for television superhero, but that's the sort of thing that the new universe makes me think of. But anyway, all that is to say, it did not it did not make the impact that Marvel, at least not in a positive direction. Like, there are just tons of creative upheavals behind the scenes. Nobody would stay on these books for any length of time. So they had a real start-stop quality to them. And I don't know, I sort of think we should maybe do New Universe Month, where we just read, like, the first issue of each of those.
I'm down. That sounds amazing.
Just to see how amazingly good or bad those series were.
I will say, if the art's anything like the shitty art I had to see here, it's probably not going to be good.
Well, yeah, that is something. Like, speaking of the art, I mean, we should get in the creative team on this series. G.I. Joe and the Transformers. I mean, rock solid for all 4 issues. We get writer Michael Higgins, penciler Herb Trimpe, who you're not a fan of, Schiff.
No.
Inkers Vince Coletta, letter Joe Rosen, colorist Nell Yomtov, editors Don Daly and future X-Men line editor and Marvel in Chief editor, overall editor in chief Bob Harris. So that's going to be your team for all 4 issues. I can tell you, I am not real familiar with Michael Higgins as a writer. When I look at his credits, he was primarily a letterer of all things for Marvel Comics, and this looks to be his first written work for them. Other than this, he's done like issues of Marvel Comics Presents. He did some Conan. He did some Power Pack, again, Sean's favorite series, like later in its run. But that's about it. Not a huge resume as a writer, anyway. Much more prominent as a letterer, as Michael Higgins. Penciler Herb Trimpe. I mean, he's kind of a real journeyman artist, like dating back to the 60s for Marvel. He did a lot of westerns in the late 60s. He really cut his teeth on Incredible Hulk comics. Had a long time run as the primary artist on Incredible Hulk. I guess you could say his claim to fame is being the artist for Wolverine's first appearance. He's not generally considered a co-creator of Wolverine, but he did illustrate his first appearance, so that's not for nothing. But yeah, he's just one of those guys who was a long time like contract employee for Marvel, who was just always scrounging for work, and I guess they threw him a bone with this limited series. Sean, did you have any thoughts on the new universe, by the way, before we move on? Because I tried to describe it as best I could, and I don't know. You maybe have read more of that stuff than I have. If you're back with us,
can you hear me now?
Yeah, we covered for you well, pal.
So, thank you. Sorry, my internet went out and it's very shoddy, so I apologize. So, I was excited because that was part of their 25th anniversary. I actually read, what was it, Merc? I don't know if you remember that series.
Oh, yeah, Merc. I don't think I mentioned that one. Yep.
No, you did not. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, so I read Merc because I was like, oh, cool. This is a guy who's like a bounty hunter for money or whatever for Vietnam War. He's like the Punisher almost. Mm. And it was butt. The whole thing was butt. But it did give us, it did give us Star Brand that to this day is still a part of the Marvel universe. Because Hickman in his Avengers run made Starbrand a very big deal, and I hated Starbrand, by the way, which maybe that explains why I hate Hickman so much. But it was overall very, very bad. It was so bad. Kickers Inc., the football players, I mean, the whole thing was just awful. And a big bomb, it tanked. It was a great idea in theory, but in execution, it was really, really bad.
Do you think that you hated Starbrand as much as John Byrne, who later wrote Starbrand, and also hated Jim Shooter so much that he nuked Jim Shooter's hometown of Pittsburgh by blowing a giant hole through the earth? Yeah. All right. So, and I propose that we do a new universe episode where we look at the first issue of all of those titles. I'll have to go back and do some research on the universe to see where a good starting point and jumping off point is, so we don't have to read the whole fucking thing. I'm going to say issue 1 of every title.
That probably makes sense. Yeah, we'll look.
I randomly have an issue of Justice that's written by Peter David. It's like issue 8, and they had already been through like probably 3 or 4 different writers and 3 or 4 different premises as far as what is this even supposed to be about by issue 8.
Hey, Tim, real quick, the artist you were just talking about, what was his name?
Herb Trimpe.
All right, so did you? And I must have missed it. Did you talk about how he used to write all the like romance shit for like Charleston and all the like early on things? Like, remember the old romance ones where you would get the covers and he would write like, you would get these old comics where you would have. A really bad yes. The guy was born in 1923, and I used to buy some of those comics when I was younger. They are so bad. Like, I can't tell you how bad those comics are. Yeah.
It's just part of that, like, pre-superhero revival, right? Where you had westerns, you had romance, you had funny animals, you had giant monsters, a lot of science fiction anthologies. You had war comics that, just an eclectic mix of genres before superheroes really took over everything.
So, all said, it doesn't surprise me that he wrote this comic.
So
Michael Higgins was the guy who wrote it. He was primarily a letterer for Marvel, weirdly enough. So, yeah, but I mean, his career as a letterer was quite prolific, actually. So, I don't know, not for nothing.
So going back, I looked up the new universe, and Jim Shooter, he was calling it the Shooterverse. I guess he thought
the Shooterverse. Yep.
They said I guess he's wanting to be Stan Lee. I'm gonna read these two paragraphs. Thank you, comic book resource CBR.com. 11 reasons why it failed. He being Jim Shooter, not only initiated the New Universe project and stayed with it for a long time, but personally wrote the first 7 issues of the flagship title Starbrand. He made Starbrand largely autobiographical, basing the main character Ken Connell's appearance and hometown of Pittsburgh on himself. He even based Connell's girlfriend, Debbie the Duck, on one of his old girlfriends. That's not fucking weird. But Shooter's reputation didn't exactly help the project. He was hated by many people inside Marvel. After he was fired, Marvel artist and writer John Byrne held a party at his house where disgruntled employees literally burned Shooter in effigy, stuffing the dummy with unsold,
they burned him in effigy. Yep.
With unsold New Universe comic books. Byrne also used Starbrand to destroy Shooter's beloved Pittsburgh.
It's amazing.
All right, I'm glad I remembered that as well as I did.
If I remember, Starbrand and Shooter
had
a bowl cut, if I remember correctly. Is that correct? I think in an appearance.
Yep. I think.
That's what I thought.
I mean, I want to say the guy in Starbrand, Ken Connell or whatever that character's name. I think he was a blonde, but he definitely had that bowl cut that Shooter had.
Correct. So everything Schiff just said made total sense to me in what he just said. That's fine.
Yeah, well, I mean, Shooter did write on occasion. Like, he wrote Secret Wars. And it's one of those things where, again, because they didn't have the money for it, I think he kind of felt like he had to do it himself because he couldn't really ask someone to step up. But it also, I mean, that was a series that the Starbrand, like this ultra powerful object that, you know, gives you godlike abilities. That's a concept that Jim Shooter just loves. It's one of his just pet concepts that he just goes back to over and over with. I mean, he did that with Michael Korvac. Remember the Korvac saga? I mean, the Beyonder is one of those characters. The Molecule Man is one of those characters where it's like he likes to give ordinary people godhood and explore the ramifications of that. He just goes back to that well over and over. So yeah, I totally get why it's completely tied to Jim Shooter. But anyway, he's a very interesting and divisive figure in comics. So, and I think this creative team, and I going to try to segue here into what we're going to be talking about. This creative team of Michael Higgins, Herb Trimpe, I mean, inker Vince Colletta, again, a guy who goes back to the 60s, a Jack Kirby inker, for God's sake, right? I think this is indicative of how Shooter sort of managed the staff of Marvel Comics, for better or worse. Like, there were a few names in the 80s that you could consider genuine, like, superstars. Like John Byrne would have been one of them. Chris Claremont was another. Frank Miller, and probably like Walter Simonson, right? In terms of guys associated with pretty historic runs on Marvel characters. And Shooter tended not to mess with those guys too much, other than Byrne, who, you know, did what he did. Everybody else, I think, was treated as sort of an interchangeable commodity. And it's like, look, you're not selling this project. The concept is what's selling it. So G.I. Joe, huge seller for us. Transformers, huge seller for us. Are we going to get Larry Hama to do it? No, he's too busy writing G.I. Joe and making money for us. Are we to get Bob Budiansky to do it? No, he's too busy making money on Transformers. We'll just get whoever, and the fact that it's this high concept G.I. Joe Transformers miniseries is what's going to sell it. So we can just get literally anybody who's not busy. or not already tied up doing New Universe, because I'm frankly a little bit surprised this thing was even published, given how much they were scrambling to get those New Universe books on the schedule. So I don't know. Maybe this had already been budgeted for and approved and scheduled, whatever. But I think his approach to the creative team was very telling of that managerial style, where it's just get anybody. It's going to make us money. It's going to be like printing money. We don't need a name artist. We don't need a name writer. You'll do.
Well, and Tim, they didn't have a budget. Like for New Universe, they didn't have a budget. That's why Shooter had to write.
Yeah, that's what I was.
So at least
that's what I was describing earlier. Yeah. They thought they had a budget, and then it got cut. So they really.
So that leads us to probably why we have these writers for this.
I think so. Yeah. So let's get into it. Wow. Where to even start? Okay. We should mention that this is like set within the world of the ongoing G.I. Joe and Transformers comics. Like, there's actually a footnote to G.I. Joe number 50 and like another footnote to Transformers number 23 in the first issue of this. Like, there's a reference to the Springfield incident, which I gather was some big G.I. Joe story. So this is like set within the ongoing worlds of both of these franchises in the comics. I do have some questions already, though, about our choice of characters. These Joes, I have to say, are not guys I'm overly familiar with. I mean, we talked about Hawk. Mutt and his dog Junkyard are in our first issue. We get Roadblock, we get Beachhead, Scarlet, Snake Eyes. Okay. But then it's sort of, I feel like it's a sharp drop off from there, where it's more like the GI Jobbers, you guys. So I'll throw it to the fans of Joe here. Are there other characters from GI Joe that maybe you were hoping to see that maybe would have made better choices or could have represented the team better than what we got for these 4 issues? Andy, what do you think?
Andy, I'll let you roll with this one. Yeah, let Andy roll with that one.
I was happy to see Mutt and Junkyard because they were pretty present. There was a thing where there was a whole bunch of characters that had pets in G.I. Joe. You had, Mutt with Junkyard. You had Snake Eyes actually had a wolf named Timber.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Was it?
Hey, don't laugh at Timber. He was badass.
Timber will fuck you up. And then there was
who had the parrot? Was that Shipwreck?
Shipwreck had the parrot.
Yeah, that was Shipwreck.
Now was it Spirit was the Indian tracker guy and Freedom was the eagle?
Yes. Correct. Spirit had the
eagle. Eagling was not the first eagle in the comic. But I was happy to see him. You don't get a lot of Scarlet or Lady J.
No.
In
or
this.
Snake Eyes, really.
No Snake Eyes, really. Roadblock a little bit. And then that's pretty much it. I mean, Beachhead was around somewhat. Stalker, I see Stalker makes an appearance. I don't even know if they name him, but I recognize them in the panel. Stalker.
Who was the main one? That, not the spoiler alert, that took on the role of what they had to do with Bumblebee as we went through who was that one? That
was Mainframe. Who I did not remember him.
I was going to say, he's kind of the MVP of this whole thing.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. When you talk about random G.I. Joe jobbers, Mainframe would be in the top of the list.
Yeah,
I'm like, who the hell is Mainframe? And he's like the most competent member.
I would actually argue that it feels like the G.I. Joes are more like not even secondary characters. I guess like third, like background characters in this. It definitely felt like more. It was the Transformers and
Cobra.
Cobra. I want to say Cobra Kai, but I knew that was 100% wrong. But yeah, Cobra, because and it seemed like, oh yeah, I guess we got to add the GI Joes somewhere in here, and
it seemed like Cobra had more of its mainframe players than GI Joe did, because you had
So
but also Cobra. I mean, GI Joe's the one that kills Bumblebee. Spoiler
Which
for the first
I
one.
kind of was like, that would be like a big deal to me as a kid. If I'm like a little kid who, if I'm Andy, right, in 1986, and watching these shows every day, and let's say I'm even a comics reader. Well, okay, we'll say I'm a little bit younger. I'm watching the shows every day. I'm reading like various comics, including Transformers and GI Joe. And in the first issue of the big team up series, at least what you go in thinking is going to be a team up series, the Joes fucking blow up Bumblebee, like blow him apart to the degree that, okay, you think this character is dead now? It's like, I mean, I get that he's a robot, but a robot in disguise, if you will. But I mean, that would be a big deal for a little kid, right?
That's killing off like the closest you can get to an audience surrogate in GI Joe and Transformers. Like Bumblebee was the kid. He was the one. I mean, they tried to replicate a little bit with Sam in the movie, but it was Bumblebee's relationship with the humans that really was the heart of Transformers.
It's Andy, like picking up an X-Men comic and they killed Jubilee in the first issue or whatever. Like,
well, listen, I did not read this comic back in the day, and I was legit stunned when they destroyed Bumblebee. Now, it made sense based on him being this big, huge, giant robot that was impacting the security of this big weapon or whatever the fuck it was, but it stunned me. Like, I read it, I'm like, holy shit, they just killed Bumblebee. That's a big event, to your point, Tim. It was huge.
Blew him to pieces.
Yeah. It was huge.
Schiff. What were you going to say, Schiff?
Yeah.
So, in the movies, which is where I'm familiar with Bumblebee, he only talks through music.
That's not the case. No.
Okay. Because when he was talking...
That was a Michael Bay edition I'm getting here.
I'm hearing the disdain in your voice.
Yeah.
Fucking Andy just went Valley Girl on us.
In the cartoon, his best friend was human. His name was Spike.
Yes.
And Spike and him were buddies, and that was his whole thing. Like, he was best friends with a human in the cartoon.
So there's some precedent for him wanting to defend human life, which is how he gets himself blown apart. Look, I kind of like the way that they do it, which is it's a classic case of mistaken identity, misread intentions, right? When two different teams are meeting for the first time, it's always going to lead to that obligatory fight, just to give you some conflict, just to give you some action, especially in a comic, where you're always jonesing for some action with each page turn. It's very satisfying on that level. But here, yeah, I mean, the Joes just, and Hawk even describes it himself. He's sort of beating himself up after the fact, saying he had a shoot first, ask questions later approach, and just killed this sentient robot, which they learn about later, I guess. But
Tim, to be fair, he was blinded by love. Let's be,
this is true. He was blinded by his love for. Okay, here's one of my many questions I'm going to have. So we meet some civilian characters in this series very early on. Senators Garcia and Senator Barbara Larkin. Now, had they appeared to your knowledge previously, Andy or Shawn? I feel like
you got me. Like the civilians in GI Joe were not memorable to me.
Yeah,
at least.
Yeah, I can't pinpoint really what the whole purpose of it was with that kid, with the exception of the Decepticon implant in his brain. I don't really know what the point was. I don't really get it.
He was a deus ex machina for the story, basically.
Man, fuck that little kid.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it was sort of I don't know. I think that I don't know what writer Michael Higgins was exactly going for there, but
But
I sort of
they
feel
went
like
the full
there's
body. They shaved his head. They
Yeah,
brain
they did full on brain
and-
surgery. Well, it's like, okay, I think he's trying to set up like this very like sort of grounded, sort of domestic story that tugs at the heartstrings or not. That's taking place alongside this very grandiose, bombastic battle between these two factions, and it's like, I think as readers, you're sitting there questioning, well, why do I care about this stupid mother-son drama thing? And it turns out that the device that they pull out of this kid's head, that was so carelessly left there when he was, I guess the Decepticons remotely took control of him, right, to put him in harm's way, and it left that weird.
Well, he was
yeah,
the
the
linchpin
brain.
for them to get this weapon. Yeah.
And they
Yeah,
were they were just very callous about it. Like, they were very callous and very careless in how they went about that, because the fact that they, didn't clean up after themselves meant that once this device was removed, it proved to be like their undoing, right? Like, you could fiddle with it and it would cause all kinds of problems for the who was it? Bombshell, the Decepticon?
The Insecticons were not always the most reliable of henchmen for the Decepticons in the cartoon. They often did not get the job done. So
they sucked.
Yeah, I was never a big Insecticon fan. It kind of blew my mind, like how they could transform so tiny from like being a giant ass robot to being an insect. That didn't compute with my brain back then. But if I could just get back to the earlier question about what G.I. Joes I wanted to see.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I would love to have seen Bazooka. He was always a fun, like, he was like, he had a football jersey on, was a comic relief guy. We have some scenes in the water. We don't get Deep Six. We don't get Cutter, who was the, I have a special thing for Cutter because the biggest G.I. Joe toy, let's say, was the hovercraft. I never got the aircraft carrier. I was not happy about that, but we never got Doc. Who else? Gung Ho, another one of my favorites.
Uh-huh.
Heavy Metal.
Yes.
We don't get him. He was he was really the precursor to Roadblock. I mean, Roadblock was basically a bigger version of Heavy Metal with a personality. Outback. Recondo was who I liked. Ripcord was another one. Rock and Roll.
See, these are all names I recognize.
Yeah. No Shipwreck.
Still couldn't tell you much about them.
You could have
had
Shipwreck, Cutter, and Deep Six all in that one thing. I mean, Snow Job, even though he was pretty present. Spirit, and
Stalker.
Torpedo.
Stalker was another one of my favorites too. I don't remember if he was a Ranger.
Yeah, he was the one. Oh Christ, I'm trying now. I got to call up this picture here. Stalker was.
What about
he was the Green Beret.
Yeah. We see Stalker for like a second in a panel. That's all.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
And so the thing that's weird, in our first issue, we get brief appearances from Optimus Prime and Megatron, who you would totally expect to see in a Transformers story, obviously. And then it's like in subsequent issues, we're getting references to their deaths, complete with like a funeral scene, sort of, for Optimus Prime. So again, I guess they're trying to incorporate events from the Transformers. We've speculated Transformers the movie, or maybe they did. I know they did an adaptation of Transformers the movie. Marvel Comics did, and perhaps they did a version. They even maybe did their own version of these character deaths in the ongoing Transformers series. I don't know if that was the same or different from the movie. I couldn't tell you, but point being, they kill off these two prominent characters in a series that is not this one, and it makes for a really, really jarring sort of transition. In a way that,
you have
like,
no leader. No leader.
You would not
the
do
Autobots
that.
don't have a leader. Decepticons, I totally spaced on the whole Shockwave wanting to take over. Because it was well established about Starscream.
And even I know that. Yeah.
And that is one thing that really made me angry was his design in the Transformers movie. And his design was terrible.
And by the way, in the cartoons, Starscream had the same voice as Cobra Commander in the G.I. Joe cartoons.
Right.
Yes, and I loved it.
Yes. Yes. So maybe that's why. Maybe they couldn't confuse the two entities because they had the same voice, Andy. Maybe that's what it was in the comics. I don't know.
But yeah, that's the thing. There's no Starscream except in like Andy, you said you caught a reference like in that last issue. He's part of the aerial battle, we think, which I think might just be a mistake. Honestly, they just put the wrong name because why is he not more involved if he's still alive?
Yeah. And the thing is,
there's
no
sense.
clear number 2 on the Autobot side until Ultra Magnus comes along. He's really the number 2.
Who, again, I'm like, where is Hot Rod? Like, isn't Hot Rod supposed to be the guy who took over?
Hot Rod is not here yet, though. He's not here yet.
Because we're doing comics, not movie, right?
Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
And he's Hot Rod for a while until he gets the Matrix spark or whatever it's called.
So we still kill Optimus Prime. We still kill Megatron, we think. We still kill maybe Starscream, unsure. But we don't have Hot Rod yet. We have...
and we don't have Galvatron either. So
we don't have Galvatron, right?
Yeah, who becomes the new leader.
It's the type of thing you would not do if this series was published today. You would basically just say, okay, this is all set either clearly before these very pivotal events or clearly after these very pivotal events, not being interrupted by these events.
Another omission too is no Soundwave. Soundwave was like the loyal, lieutenant communications guy that flipped out the coolest cassettes that transform like Laserbeak and Ravage. Who Ravage is here, but that doesn't really get much. And Laserbeak is mentioned in the same panel as Starscream.
Jesus. So yeah, not a lot of the recognizable characters you would have.
I mean, the Dreadnought's got a lot of shine.
It's like we got G.I. Joe like black and white, like when we did the split off on the NWO or something. It's like
right, yeah. This is like what the Cobra Black and Silver or something, because it's like you even had Cobra Commander in that first issue, and then he's gone later on. So it's like holy shit.
He supposedly was dead too. Him and Destro both. So in this, Destro was dead. He was dead. Megatron was dead.
But they still had appearances.
Died,
they still had early appearances in those first 2 issues.
Yes, but they died in the middle of the series. All of them.
All of the leadership disappears between issues of this, which is, I mean, a major problem. I mean, just from a narrative standpoint, that's a major flaw, right? That's again something you don't do with this sort of.
Granted, Cobra, there wasn't as many named Cobra characters. There are, you pretty much, they had the same major players for the most part. You had who's not even in this. Major Blood's not even in this.
Right.
Dr. Mindbender. We get Baroness. And outside of that,
we didn't get Serpentor.
Serpentor is like Hawk to me. Like I thought Serpentor was he was a caricature. I mean, it's funny. Shift's like, who's this guy with the snake on? And I'm like, that's Serpentor. I said his origin is they went and they dug up dead dictators and evil geniuses.
By the way, a hell of a
DNA and they combined it to create Serpentor.
That was a hell of a cartoon miniseries, though.
It was
amazing. Yes, it was.
But it's trying to explain.
So he's like made up of the DNA of like Genghis Khan and
exactly
Alexander the Great and like
He's
Hitler. I don't think they said Hitler,
Yeah.
but he's probably in there.
He's like the Shazam of Cobra, Tim.
Okay, so he's butt.
Yeah, he's butt. Yes.
Okay. But yeah, so that's your Cobra is basically just Serpentor and Dr. Mindbender, and that's about Baroness is around. She's kind of the most competent member of Cobra in this thing.
Yeah. Zartan is a little bit.
Zartan's in it a little bit.
Zartan's one of the coolest characters, but he's not in it. Most of his bumbling idiot dreadnoughts are in it. You know, you have Ripper. Yep. Buzzsaw and
was that like the guys on the Sons of Anarchy ripoff?
Yeah. They're Cobra, but not. They're more like mercenaries. So they're not full. They're bad guys, but they're not full-fledged Cobra. So to speak.
They were like the high. They were like Zartan's hired help. Right?
Yeah, they're like hired guns. I mean, Zorana, who wasn't in the show that much, you know, is Zartan's sister. She gets some time in this. Also we don't get Eels would have been good in this
Eels.
one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Firefly was another major one. Raptor, Scrap Iron, no Storm Shadow at all.
Yeah, no Storm Shadow. That's a big one for me.
And no Tomax and Zaymot, the twins.
Yeah.
I always hated them. But I get that they were big characters.
Well, in the cartoon, they were annoying as shit because they would finish each other's sentences and they would talk, annoying as shit.
They were such idiots. I sort of like Dr. Mindbender because ever since Arrested Development, I've always pictured him as David Cross in light bondage gear.
Nice.
So yeah, I sort of like that character, and he kind of gets some shine throughout this.
And then
he played a very major part in this. He
probably has the biggest part outside of Hawk in the whole comics.
Yep.
And
I mean, there's one thing that bothered me though, and I like the aerial bots. Well, one thing that but I don't remember Bumblebee basically having, for lack of a better term,
body dysmorphia.
Penis envy of the aerial bots, like flying envy. Like what the hell? Because
they were. By the way, he's not Bumblebee anymore.
Well, no, he talks about when he's bitching and moaning about not being able to fly like the Aerobots, he's still Bumblebee.
Oh, he is. Well, I forgot about that because
that's another question I have. So Bumblebee, after he gets destroyed and rebuilt, decides that he is over. Listen, he is now over his body dysmorphia, where he wishes he was an aerial bot. He's not, but he has been upgraded apparently throughout the process of being rebuilt. I will say there's a very, very effective. I thought maybe y'all thought it was corny, but I thought it was a very effective comedy scene where the Joes are working on trying to rebuild mainframe, and they think they've done a pretty good job.
And then he's all jacked up, right?
And the actual like Transformers Dr. Ratchet or whoever comes in and is like, "Oh, you were able to save him. Oh my God, I'm so grateful. He's actually a dear friend of mine. Where is he?" And then we get the reveal of what they've done, and he just looks like shit.
What have you done to my boy?
They're just like, "Oh," and I just remember the line. He goes, "Well, there's a certain logic to what you've done here, but it's going to need some, and I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that line for next time somebody really fucks up at work. I'm going to go, there's a certain logic to what you did, but
I can't find it.
Yeah.
They need a wheeljack actually to do the fixing here. Ratchet was like their medical guy. Ratchet was their expert who could build shit.
So
also Sergeant Slaughter showed up in episode 2. Sorry, I know we're jumping around.
Yep.
Yeah. Slaughter becomes a full-edged Joe with his renegades.
There you go.
He does.
They're like the babyface version of the Dreadnoughts.
Sergeant Slaughter is a big part of G.I. Joe the movie. He is like one of the main centerpieces of the actual cartoon movie.
Oh wow, I did not know that.
And Rocky Balboa actually is listed in the order of battle too, by the way.
But anyway, Anyway, let's get back to the rebuilt Bumblebee.
All right, yeah. So the rebuilt Bumblebee, once Ratchet has fixed and improved on the work that the Joes have done, decides he wants to be known as Gold. He says he wants a more dignified name than Bumblebee, right? So he decides that more dignified name is Goldbug.
Goldbug. No, Tim.
Is this something that was done in any of the other appearances? Like, is this from the cartoons at all, or?
I had 0.0 recollection of this whole Goldbug. Like, I legit, my jaw dropped when I saw that. No context whatsoever. Andy, I don't know about you, but I remember none of that.
I don't know if it happened like in the movie when they were kind of like moving to the New Guard and they wanted to keep Bumblebee around.
Yeah, never in the history of the comics or the animated series do I remember this, Tim, ever.
All right, I'll just say that it just seems to me that you don't change the name of a licensed character unless the order has come down from the actual license holder. Hey, we're changing the name of this guy. Can you please work it into your comic or whatever, right? But if Hasbro didn't actually do that, then boy, this is Michael Higgins taking some liberties, huh? I mean,
well,
because I don't think you're supposed to be able to do that.
I'm more astonished that Goldberg ripped his name off from the Transformers comic books. That's what I'm more astonished at right now.
Goldbug.
Yeah. No, I'm talking about Goldberg the wrestler ripped his name off from Goldbug. I'm very astonished at that. I don't know. Just saying.
In any case, so I like the idea also that we start with G.I. Joe, where we get the introduction of the senators and we'll talk about the romance with Senator Larkin and General Abernathy. But they're basically protecting this, what they keep referring to it as a power station. And from what I gather, what they've actually done is the humans have created a transformer, not an intelligent transformer, but a transformer nonetheless that does all these cool whiz-bang things, and is going to be like this, I guess, Alpha. Yeah, and they start calling it the Alpha about halfway through the series, which, okay, fine. But it's like, I guess it's doing like the 80s version of renewable energy type stuff, but it's also portable. Like, you can use it in different environments, and it can fly, it can swim, it can do all this, it can bore through rock, it can do all this cool stuff. And I'm like, all right, I'm kind of on board with that, but I think they made a mistake in not really establishing what this thing was until about, I don't know, the last issue.
Well, I mean,
because we
really,
know that it's important.
Was it like
we know
drill?
That it's a MacGuffin, right?
It drilled to the center of the earth. Like, I was so lost at what it really was. It flew. It was a jet. Yeah. It drilled. I don't know.
And I guess they got the point across that, and it's, at the end of the day, it is a MacGuffin. It's just something that the various different factions are chasing after that they want for their own ends, and I can appreciate that. But I think we could have gotten a little bit more background on this thing, maybe from the jump, instead of figuring it out as we went. But the Decepticons, they want this thing, Alpha, the portable mobile power station, because they're going to use it to strip mine the Earth of all of its resources, which will destroy the Earth, and that's of no consequence to them. I'm fine with that.
Which we see in a really, really bad drawn panel in one of the
like
issues.
the kind of the flash forward of what this would look like, sort of deal. Yeah.
And by the way, the art, this is terrible. The art in this series is absolutely
I don't think it's terrible. You know what it is?
So bad.
It's very workmanlike, is what it is. That's what you got when you were a house artist for a major publisher. You weren't a superstar. You were just a monthly on the payroll, artist, doing your craft. It was not like this was ever meant to be held up as, something that we're going to say, this belongs in a museum someday, right? Like it's just, it is what it is. It gets the job. I think there's a difference. I think there's a difference between this and terrible, right? Like,
all right,
it's not like this is unclear. It's not like you can't follow it. It's not like anyone's especially badly rendered. It's just, it's very no frills, right?
Okay, I'll agree to disagree. I did not think the art was great.
You really think it's terrible?
I think it was worse than Capel, and I thought Capel was pretty bad.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think it's worse than that.
I think this was the worst thing we've read so far. I know we have a small sample size, but like,
well,
no, I was talking about the
Pacheco.
I was talking about the art. I was talking about the art.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I was talking about the art.
I'm saying both.
I think it's just. I mean, look,
Calm down, Chef.
It's 4 to 8 panels a page. That's all you're going to get. There's no real experimentation. There's no innovation going on. But look, I'm cashing checks. I'm just trying to beat my deadlines, get this shit done.
But Tim, to your
I got
point,
a lot of characters to draw.
Yeah, no, that's where I was going to go next. To your point, there's a lot to draw. You got to draw a lot of robots. You got to draw a lot of planes. You got to draw a lot of characters.
I got to draw a lot of shit that doesn't even exist.
You got a romance to draw. There's a lot to draw.
I got to do action. I got to do romance. I got to do different environments. Like, come on, like. I just think Herb Trimpe deserves a little bit of credit. It's
all right,
no, it's not flashy. It's
all right. You got me. You sold me.
Maybe they killed off characters because they didn't want to draw them.
Oh wait, let's wait till we get to the romance to talk about that great fucking ending.
All right. Well, yeah. I probably no better time than to talk about. So there is a romantic subplot that runs throughout this between Senator Larkin and General Abernathy Hawk.
Hawk is
I guess
smashing.
They're trying to humanize this character Hawk a little bit, I guess. Which I don't know how effective that is. He kind of, I don't know. He seems like a real jarhead dope, basically, throughout all of this. Like he's not very impressive, right? As the leader of the Joes, he doesn't do anything that makes him come across as, oh yeah, I see why this guy's in charge, right? And so he's romancing the senator. It's like love at first sight, apparently, for these two. But she turns out to be on the take. We get a very intriguing scene where she sits down for a lunch meeting with someone who is very obviously the Baroness, who does not reveal it until they get to the dramatic panel where they do reveal it. But it's obviously her.
Hey, by the way, guys, when you were reading this, and Andy, I'll ask you because this is very typical of G.I. Joe comics or series. Did you know that she was going to end up being like a ringer in the end? Like I knew when I was reading this, I totally saw it coming.
I had no idea. I was blown away.
Andy, what about you?
I thought she was going to be somebody in disguise. Like I thought maybe she could have been the Baroness.
A transformer?
Yeah, I knew she was going to end up being some kind of Cobra kind of thing. I knew that.
I'll put it this way.
Or it could be Zorana because Zartan was a master of disguise, and so was his brother and sister. Well,
it would have been very funny if it were Zartan.
Yeah.
But maybe his sister. I mean, she has a very, I don't know, Mrs. Cunningham, Marriott Hartley thing working here, I think.
Well, she's kind of hot. I mean, she's drawn very attractive for like kind of like Leave It to Beaver mom hot. I mean, she's got that look.
Kind of hot 80s lady sort of thing.
And by the way, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that they actually went behind closed doors and insinuated that her and Hawk had sex. I mean, they did that.
Nothing wrong with a little bump and grind.
And Hawk fell in love with her after like one issue. So I don't know. There's some crazy shit going on here.
To the point that we see him drinking and smoking while thinking about her, and he's so lovelorn that he's like, oh my god.
I mean, there is. Plus, we get that scene on the cruise ship where we got chicks in bikinis. So there's this not exactly for kids. Well, maybe adolescent boys.
The rando Blackstone guy who knew all about the Transformers.
Yeah, who the fuck was that?
That was another question I had. I assumed that y'all would tell me who that was.
I had no idea who that was.
I had zero idea who that guy. I assume there's some context to who he is, but I have no idea. None.
I don't remember him from the show, and I think he's probably from the other G.I. Joe comics.
Yeah, I assume he's probably
from Transformers comics.
I would assume he's from the Transformers comics.
Okay.
I would assume, but I don't know. So
I mean, that would be my best guess.
But anyway,
all that is to say, this doesn't do the best job of introducing your characters to new readers. It's kind of assumed that you know who all these characters are, and anyone new is, well, they're new to this series. I just personally, I don't think I gave this series enough credit for having this is going to sound shitty, the level of sophistication to do the twist that they do with Senator Larkin, where it turns out that she's on the take and she has this secret meeting with the Baroness. I'm like, oh, look at this series actually throwing in a little dramatic twist. I was like, oh, I just totally didn't. I just figured she was a straightforward
Tim, if you watch the
character.
Cartoon, if you watch the cartoon, you would probably have more.
I would have seen it coming.
You would have saw that coming if you watched the cartoon. It would.
Well, look at that being with maintaining the integrity, fidelity to the cartoon, whatever, right?
Yep.
What I was really shocked with was when they ended up killing her off.
All right, so Schiff, way to really just jump into that. I think we're building to that, but way to just spoil it.
I'm sorry.
He's on brand.
Well, it does happen very abruptly though, because it's the type of thing where we don't learn a great deal about her intentions. It seems like she was a well-meaning senator who was trying to do right by, as she puts it, her home state. I don't know. We're not told what state she represents, do we? I guess it doesn't matter. But this project, the Alpha power station, is going to bring in a lot of money. Going to bring in a lot of jobs, a lot of money. But she has sold out to Cobra, and she has overlooked all of the red flags associated with this project. And ultimately, it seems like she thinks that Cobra are just going to destroy this thing, and that's why the Dreadnoks are there in the first issue when they're doing the launch of the thing, right? When they're doing the test and they've got all the protesters. It seems like she knows and she's expecting them to act at that point, and she thinks they're just going to destroy it, when really I think Cobra is more like, no, we're going to steal it and use it for ourselves, and but she thinks that they're just like eco-terrorists or something, and it's like, well, if it gets destroyed, doesn't matter, at least it brought in the jobs and the money that it did for the time that it did, and I'm none the wiser, right? I think that's what the idea behind her, kind of selling out to Cobra is. And they're going to double cross her, but we just never get to that because in the end, we find out she is considered a loose end, in fact. And before Hawk even has a chance to confront her over her treachery, which was exposed to him earlier in the book, she just gets straight up assassinated. The last scene,
out of the blue, stunningly, out of nowhere.
Yeah, we get a couple panels through the perspective of a sniper's scope, and next thing you know, blammo, she's gone, and we don't know who pulled the trigger. Presumably, just someone for Cobra.
But they say
at the Baroness's behalf,
did it, which was weird. They said he did it in the comic, and I was like, did Hawk shoot this woman?
Right, yeah, the reaction was kind of confused, I thought, also. But I don't think they were trying to imply that Hawk or one of the Joes or somebody did it. Shit, maybe But I mean, we do get the reveal of, the Baroness commenting on, well, that's one loose end resolved. So, I mean, that has to tell us that she was behind it, right?
Yes.
But yeah, very abrupt, very violent for this sort of thing. I guess that's not the type of thing you would have seen in the cartoon.
Nope, not at all.
But in all fairness, it was a fantastic ending. Like,
it was.
It all
Yeah.
I didn't
really
see it coming.
Payoff.
No, it's great payoff for sure.
But yeah, I mean, just these 4 issues have tons of issues. I will grant you that. But as somebody who again, doesn't really know these characters, doesn't really know the tropes of these different at least cartoon universes, I didn't find it especially hard to follow. Honestly, I had an easier time just following along with this than I did, our last episode with Superman and Batman. Just in terms of the plot of those 5 issues, which, time travel, convoluted nonsense. This was at least pretty straightforward. Even though, I had a lot of questions. I knew I would have a lot of questions, and I knew that this wasn't going to be the most accessible thing to a new reader. It's expected that you're going to know these characters, because why the hell else are you in the market for a G.I. Joe Transformers team up, right? So as somebody who was I would say a novice to this, I didn't really have a hard time with it. I thought, again, it surprised me in some ways, the kid with the device in his brain and his mom who's fretting and worried, and how that sort of plays out alongside this these battles between robots and paramilitary forces. I don't know. I sort of like how that was set up, even though it's a bit clumsy. It got the idea across. It got the theme of, sometimes the thing that is the furthest thing from your mind, that you're maybe a little bit careless about, is going to be your undoing. And I like that ending too, with, the senator being assassinated just out of nowhere, and that's the beat that we're left on.
And a broken-hearted Hawk, at her gravesite is how they
ended. The broken-hearted Hawk, yes.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sold on this romance, but it's there. I mean, it at least gives this character some dimensionality that he didn't have before. I don't know. At the end of the day, I'm not saying this was good or that I'd recommend it, but it surprised me. I'll put it that way. It surprised me in ways the bad things are were going to be the obvious bad things from the outset, I think. And it's largely structural, right? Because of all of the leadership for, the Decepticons, the Autobots, Cobra, all of their leaders just disappear between issues, which is really just something you don't do.
And the one thing to wrap it all up is we didn't actually talk about is that G.I. Joe, the Decepticons, G.I. Joe, Cobra, and the Autobots all team up to defeat the Decepticons. So it's all they all team up to go after one, which I thought was also cool that they did that. That was cool. So there is some cool aspects to it. The execution could have been better. It was a little wonky, but again, Tim, as you talk through it, it's kind of like in that first episode of Capel. If you got me sold a little bit more on it than I was when I came into it. So part of Tim's art form in hosting this thing, that's one of the things you do really well with this. So well done. You've done it. You managed to do it to me one more time.
Meanwhile, all Schiff is saying, the best part was it was only 4 issues.
The best part was she died in the end. That's what Schiff said.
Not wrong. It was legit.
No, it's not wrong. It is legit the best part of the whole series. That ending came out of nowhere. But yeah.
Yeah.
So I try to do notes when I do this stuff, so I can, just have some stuff to think about when I do. I literally like got so bored. I was like, first issue, Bumblebee killed. Second issue, Sergeant Slaughter shows up. Optimus Prime has been assassinated.
That's the takeaway from that.
And also, Optimus Prime has been assassinated. Did I miss that? And then Senator Larkin and Hawk fuck. And then my last note is this shit sucks. So I stopped taking notes halfway through issue 2.
Oh, shift. Never stop shifting. That's all I'm going to say. Never stop shifting.
I mean, I'm not going to try to make you like something that you clearly hate. There's things that just, it's not going to happen, right?
Like, there's been comics like that I've read that I thought would speak, like, that I didn't think I would enjoy, but then I was like, oh my god, blown away with it. But with this, like, I was just like, I'm glad I read it because it's like, I never would have read a Transformer or G.I. Joe comic, but now I can be like, I'm done with this chapter.
Now you never will again.
But you know what? To be fair, this is not a true Transformers G.I. Joe. It's not a true representation of what those comics are, to be honest. This is a clear cash grab because of what they are. If you were going to go back and read the original comics, they're much more involved, much more character driven than what you're reading in this. So let's just be clear. So,
and I think there's a version of this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You think it's a positive or a negative, having the knowledge of the canon of both of these, like Shawn and I going in? Do you think, because one thing that was derailing me at times was me getting angry about lack of characters or why is this character included? That was what some of my,
it's a negative, Andy, because like for me, like I read the G.I. Joe comics, there is some great character driven comics of G.I. Joe in those early days that I read that were before this limited series that just totally made me go, God damn, this is fucking bullshit. And so it definitely does suck. But if you just go into a vacuum and just read it, if you know nothing about it, maybe you can enjoy it a little bit better, but which is
probably why Tim liked it probably a little more.
Yeah.
I
would agree.
He got to play my part a little bit on this episode.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Great point.
I'm going to say it's a little bit of a double-edged sword where, yes, it's going to be a negative if you go in having an expert level of knowledge about both of these properties, because you're going to come away disappointed, right? And I know that. I've said many times when it comes to like the mainstream Marvel Universe characters and a lot of the MCU translations and films, I definitely think it's to my detriment sometimes that I'm like too close to these characters, right? I've said that, especially when it comes to like X-Men. I'm always going to be very, very, very hard on like any X-Men film because I'm coming from that place of just being a real deep-seated fan. Now, I also would like to think that, and I'll, to your credit, Andy and Shawn as well, it probably gives you more of an informed opinion than somebody like me who's just, ignorance is bliss, right? And I don't know what I don't know, but you guys, like, I think hearing it from you, like, no, listen, this is why this doesn't work. I'm like, okay, yeah, like, I didn't have that information. Like, I don't know these characters, so yeah, when you present it through that lens, it makes a lot more sense where you're coming from and why you're as critical as you are. So I get it totally, but I definitely do like being more in the passenger seat, so to speak, for a change, when it comes to just not knowing this stuff very well, and just enjoying the ride. So I do think that there is a version of this story that is much, much better in execution. Like if you had gotten one of the regular writers, like if you'd gotten Larry Hama to write this and said, look, do it the way you want to do it, but here are the beats that you have to hit, because at the end of the day, there are things that people are going to want to see. There are boxes we have to check, but however you want to get there is up to you. Here's 4 issues, or here's even 6 issues. Right? This could actually be even a longer form story because you have so many characters involved. And in the hands of somebody who knows these characters in and out and has created a lot of these characters for that matter, I think you could have something really special. But as it stands, to your point, Shawn, yeah, probably just a cash grab. That I don't know what the reception to this would have been at the time by regular readers. I suspect maybe along the same lines. It's not like this is something people talk about today, which is why it makes for a great topic on this podcast.
I was surprised to see Omega Supreme because
I didn't even know who that was.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
I would have liked to seen Skylinks though. Skylinks was like this. It could have like 3. See, there were also some Transformers that came along that had like could transform into 2 different things. So it was like 3.
2 different things.
Total of 3, and there weren't a lot of them. But Skylinks was like the car form was like a cat, like a lynx basically, and then it had a space shuttle, and then it had like a giant almost like dinosaur type with wings and shit.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember it in this one. It was like an outbreak kind of episode where all the Transformers were getting infected by some kind of red thing, and Skylinks was like one of the last ones to go down. Shawn, do you remember that from the cartoon?
Say that one more time, Andy.
It was like this, like some kind of like, I don't know, like a disease that like it was like this red dust that was like infecting all the. It doesn't matter if you were Autobot or Decepticon.
Yes. My God.
I remember Skylinks. That's like that episode of Smurfs when if they got bit on the tail, they became purple and they became like evil, like almost like zombies.
Jesus.
Like Papa Smurf was the last one to go down. That was a big thing.
Was this like What If, like Smurf edition?
Yeah, that was something that like
Smurfs.
scarred me as a kid. Like, being like in those like they basically took like a zombie story and made it into like a kid's cartoon story thing, like an infection that was getting around. And they did in Smurfs, they did in Transformers, something like that. Yeah. But I do remember Skylinks was like the last one to go down, right? Like, like kind of sacrifice himself, hoping that like, what he did was going to lead to the cure coming or something like that.
God damn, pal.
It's some deep shit.
Yeah, deeper than I would expect. So there's a few ways to read this story. It's not on Marvel Unlimited because these were 2 licensed properties, which Marvel no longer has the license to. But the current license holder, I gather IDW, has actually reprinted this, which is allowed because it did not feature any original Marvel characters. It's all, just again licensed properties.
Hasbro.
So, through Hasbro. So they collected this in a trade paperback from 2012. It's called G.I. Joe Transformers Volume 1. And it's also, I am told, in the 8th and final volume of Transformers Classics. I don't know if those are still in print. If they are not, then this can also be gotten on Comixology, which is, I understand, how some of you read this.
Yeah, if you have Comixology Unlimited, it's free to read as part of the subscription. That's how I read it. So
how about that?
Yep.
And if you want to buy the actual issues, you can find it used on eBay. Again, I am told for $55 for a complete set. That's quite a lot for.
Yep. Yeah, it ranges anywhere from 35 to 55, depending.
Yeah, I gotta imagine there's a range. Your CGC graded books are going to go for a whole lot more. But if you're just trying to find, in decent condition, these 4 issues, they're out there.
That's pretty much what I have. Mine are decent condition. They're not in sleeves or anything like that. Brody from Mallrats would be screaming at me right now.
Oh, I'm the worst comic collector in the world because I've just got shit piled up, basically, not even in boxes. So.
Back to board?
Oh no, just piled,
Oh.
just piled up, just sitting around.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no!
Yeah. I have very little, like, I don't know, like, sentimentality when it comes to physical comic books. I mean, there are some, like, from my childhood, but anything like, I don't know, older than like 1996 is just like, I'll wipe my ass with it and put it on a shelf kind of thing. Just, you would think I would not be like that, but I don't know. Anyway, any final thoughts from you guys? I think we have about covered it here.
Yeah, I'll go first. If you're a fan of these, like Andy is, go out of your way and read it. But if you're on the peripheral, like you've just watched the movies, just like I have, and I'm a little bit on the younger side. I say that as a 33-year-old. I'm getting up there in age. I would stay away. But like I said, if you enjoy those, check it out. But as we discussed, you're not going to get the characters you're used to. You're getting Golden Bug. And a bunch of other characters who I don't know. Someone who's dressed like a serpent. Just like the D team. But yeah.
All right.
Gold.
Not the Village people. God.
What I will add is, if you really want to get really good G.I. Joe and really good Cobra, or I'm sorry, a good Cobra and good Transformers, go back and read the original Marvel. Like, I was never, okay, so for me, Transformers, the comic, was never a big thing for me because I feel like Transformers doesn't translate the comic books as well as it does on TV, because the whole cool thing about Transformers is how they transform into vehicles, and you lose some of that luster in comics.
Mm-hmm.
Like that whole
the visual doesn't translate.
So for me, I would say I'm okay if you ignore the comic book version of Transformers and watch the cartoon. What I will tell you is, though, the G.I. Joe comic books are amazing, and there's some good character development. There's some good storytelling. Some of the best stories, especially when it comes to Snake Eyes, and his backstory is absolutely amazing.
Oh, his backstory is so
good.
Good.
But there are some really good character-driven stories that are and really go out of your way to read G.I. Joe. If you want to see some good G.I. Joe, go back and read the original Marvel. And even the later G.I. Joe that IDW and all those do, there's some really good G.I. Joe stories out there. Schiff, I would tell you to go out of your way to do that too. Don't use this miniseries as context for how good they can be, because it doesn't do it justice. This really is a cash grab, just to tell you that. So that's my opinion. If you want,
it sounds like probably it sounds like probably don't use the cartoons as a judge for how good these properties can be.
The G.I. Joe cartoons. The cartoons are fantastic, especially the ones the pre-Serfenter ones, or whatever his name is.
Pre-Hawk.
Yeah, pre-Serfenter, pre-Hawk ones are amazing. So, yeah. Pre-Sergeant Slaughter.
Sergeant Slaughter kind of he was like,
yeah.
It's like adding it jumped the shark a little bit with Sergeant Slaughter coming in.
I'm just thinking back to the little bit of G.I. Joe exposure I've had from the cartoons, and it's like, I wouldn't try to rewatch those today as an adult, but the comic I probably would. Just again because of Larry Hama and knowing the just amount of detail and attention that he gave this world.
Larry Hama, he does an amazing job. He makes G.I. Joe fantastic. So
yeah, and I mean, if he was a longtime writer of Wolverine comics as well. Throughout the night. I mean, pretty much the principal writer of that character throughout the 90s. Correct. So, I mean, he's no slouch.
I mean, for me, the appeal of this was the crossover, like seeing my two favorite cartoons together. It just, it was what drew me to it. And I would seek out the cartoons. If you're really interested in this, watch the cartoons and just enjoy them. And because there is some really great storytelling in there and some great characters, and not a lot of characters you see in this series here. But the movies, I a little part of my childhood dies every time I watch one. Like I said, I didn't hate the first Transformers, although I did walk out of the movie theater sounding very comic book guy-y with all my gripes. I was like, okay, first of all, Devastator was not a truck; it was the six, and the design of Devastator in the second movie or the third movie, I was pissed off at that. So I think it was the second movie. And the G.I. Joe movies, yeah, they are kind of crappy, and I wish there was talk, and I think it never really came to fruition, but of a shared universe for
Right.
It was going to be G.I. Joe, Transformers, Mask, and Micronauts, which is something I never really watched, but you guys know, like I do like I screenwrite on the side. Like it's like a fun for me, and it's maybe a pipe dream. But like if I ever got a chance to do a licensed property, I would love to write a Mask movie. That is,
Really?
because it's not as well known, and I think you could kind of have like a little bit of a sandbox, but you don't want to turn it into Battleship. That's the only problem with that, because Battleship just shit the bed on what could have been an awesome sandbox to play in. But Mask is. I'll talk about it when we get the plugs, but Mask is definitely something I'm going to want to do on the new cartoon pod once that's up and going.
Very cool. So I'm doing a little independent research on the fly here, and it appears that Optimus Prime was killed off in issue 24 of the ongoing Transformers series, which, again, would have been very contemporaneously published, like, alongside this limited series. So very different from whatever they did in Transformers the movie. They do kill off Optimus Prime, but it's not just, a straight adaptation of the movie. And it looks like maybe Megatron buys it in the next issue, 25. I'm not sure about that, but I think that these events from the ongoing series are what intruded upon this poor little limited series. And by the way, the name Goldbug is incorporated into the ongoing series. It says, let's see, as of issue 29, Bumblebee, now calling himself Goldbug, meets with GB Blackrock. Okay, there's Blackrock, that character, to try to get information on the Decepticons. Meanwhile, a mysterious Transformer with a horrible threat has crash landed in the Southwest in a story called Crater Critters. So there you go. I want to say Transformers was a lot more popular for some reason in the UK as a comic than it ever was in the States. I don't know why that is, but I know a lot of UK-based comic fans are like big Transformers fans, and it's because of Transformers the comic more so than like the cartoon. So anyway, that's about it for this episode of Traders of the Lost Arks. We will be at it again next month. This is a monthly podcast. I feel like we just did our first episode, and here we are already on episode 3. We'll be at episode 4 sooner than you think, so that'll be like our own 4-issue limited series. But we're going to try to keep it going, and I don't know what we'll cover next, but I'm sure it will be a fun outing all the same. So, for Scott Shifflett, for Shawn Kidd, for Andy Atherton, I am Tim Capel. We will catch you next time, right here on Place Nation Pop.
G.I. Joe.